It was 11:24 a.m. when Mark kissed Carla goodbye for the last time. By 5:30, she was gone. No forced entry, no signs of a struggle, and yet she was murdered in broad daylight. In the summer of 1978, Mark and Carla thought they were building the beginning of a simple, beautiful life. They had just purchased a modest home in Wood River, Illinois, just 30 minutes away from the heart of St. Louis, offering the best of both worlds, the hum of the city life and the quiet charm of a small town. Mark, a stoic former military man with calloused hands for years working construction, was finally ready to put down roots. Carla, 22 at the time, radiant and spirited, was the kind of woman who made rooms feel warm when she entered, with golden hair that caught the sunlight and eyes full of ambition. She was attending a local college and pulling shifts at the local IHOP to make ends meet. Though they weren't married, something that raised eyebrows in their conservative neighborhood, they were in love, and that was enough for them. But love couldn't stop what came next. Mark kissed Carla goodbye at 11:24 a.m. before heading off to work, and Carla stayed behind to unpack boxes and settle into the new home. Sometime between organizing books and placing picture frames, Carla answered a call from a close friend. The conversation, however, would be cut short by a loud, urgent pounding on the door. This was the last time anyone spoke to Carla. What happened in the following 6 hours remains clouded in uncertainty. The only pieces of the puzzle come from fragmented witness statements and grim police observations. Around 5:30 p.m., Mark returned home with a friend, Tom, excited to show off the new house. As they approached the front door, something immediately felt wrong. The door was ajar. The lock was untouched. "Carla," Mark called out. No answer. As he moved deeper into the house, he noticed smears of something dark trailing towards the basement. Panic rising in his throat, Mark raced down the steps. The air was heavy, still, unnaturally quiet. He turned a corner, and there she was. Carla's body was submerged waist-deep in a 25-gallon utility bucket filled with water. Her hands were bound tightly behind her back with electrical wire. A man's sock had been knotted viciously around her neck. Her lower body was exposed. It was every man's nightmare, and it was now Mark's reality. Tom was the one who called the police as Mark collapsed beside Carla, screaming her name again and again. When authorities arrived, they found Mark inconsolable. Tom filled in the blanks that he could, but the horror spoke for itself. As it is standard procedure, suspicion initially fell on Mark, but he was quickly cleared. The assistant attorney assigned to the case later remarked that the basement felt wrong, as if the very walls were watching. Chill in the air wasn't from broken windows or a faulty vent. It was something else. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no broken locks, just unsettling stillness, and a single struggle apparently started near the basement sofa. The crime scene was cruel. The wire binding Carla's wrist was wrapped too tight for any escape. The sock around her neck had to be cut away, and her exposed state pointed to the unspeakable. Miles away in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Carla's sister Donna and her husband Terry received the call. Carla was gone. On their long, agonizing drive back to Illinois, they stopped at payphones along the highway, desperate for answers. At one stop, Donna reached her sister, Connie. Her voice was shaking. "It was worse than you could imagine," she said. "You need to come home now." With Mark cleared of any suspicion, detectives turned their attention to the surrounding neighborhood. Wood River, a quiet town where everyone seemed to know everyone, suddenly gripped by whispers of unease. Carla's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a violation, a brutal one, and it had happened in broad daylight. The investigation began with the house right next door. Dwayne Conway, a local, told investigators he'd been sitting on his porch all afternoon with a friend, John Pranty. The two had been drinking and smoking some marijuana, but claimed they hadn't seen or heard anything. The police were skeptical, because from where Dwayne's porch sat, you could see straight into Carla and Mark's driveway, feet away, Could they have missed something so violent, so loud? As officers canvassed the neighborhood, they stumbled upon the former resident of Carla and Mark's home. She told them a chilling story. The day that the crime had happened, she was riding by with her grandson Eric. They stopped into the driveway, looked up, and happened to see Carla arguing with a man. Eric didn't see the man's face clearly, but he described him as a medium to tall build with dark brown medium-length hair. It wasn't much, but it was something. Further digging revealed that Carla had been on the phone with a friend shortly after Mark left for work at 11:24 a.m. The friend recalled hearing a knock on the door mid-conversation, right around noon. After that, calls to Carla went unanswered. Based on this timeline, police believe she was killed between noon and 12:30. The suspect list began to shrink, and with Wood River being such a tight-knit community, the pool wasn't large to begin with. The eye of the town turned inward. One of the first names that came up was Jack Meyer. Jack was more than an acquaintance. He had made several advances towards Carla, which she politely declined. Jack was questioned and looked at closely, but eventually ruled out. Then a darker possibility. Carla's former stepfather, Joe Shepard. Though his marriage to Carla's mother had been brief, his presence left a lasting impression. Carla's sister remembered Joe as a cruel and domineering man. Carla's friends would say that he gave them the creeps. With a history of inappropriate behavior and a reputation of being aggressive, but the deeper the police looked, the more dead ends they hit. 2 weeks passed, no arrests, no answers. Carla's case was in danger of becoming cold. Frustrated investigators circled back to their original interview, specifically with Dwayne Conway and his porch companion, John Pranty. The problem was simple. Their proximity to the crime scene made their silence suspicious. How could they have missed everything? Both men were brought in for a polygraph. John passed without issue. The examiner noted no signs of deception. Dwayne, however, was another story. The examiner couldn't tell if he was lying or simply terrified. Either way, the results were inconclusive, but suspicion grew. Meanwhile, Carla's family and the entire community demanded answers. The murder wasn't the only cause for concern. Around that time, a rash of break-in and sexual assaults had rattled the town. One of those assaults had occurred just blocks away from Carla's home. In that case, arrest had been made. The suspect's name was Tony Garza, a man with a troubling past and a dangerous reputation. And when investigators looked into Tony, they saw something chilling. He matched the very description that Eric, the young boy in the car, had given. Same build, same hair, same timeline. Even more disturbing, Tony's cellmates claimed that he had been bragging about Carla's murder, saying he did it, saying they couldn't prove it. When the police confronted Tony, he denied everything, but now they had a face and maybe a killer. After his second interview, Tony Garza began to unravel. His version of Carla's murder was riddled with inconsistencies. What initially sounded like a confession quickly dissolved under scrutiny. He recounted details that only echoed what had been printed in the paper, nothing more. No more knowledge of the scene, no personal connection to the crime. Tony was ruled out, but the damage was already done. Fear had sunk its claws deeper into Wood River. The townspeople, once comfortable leaving their doors and windows unlocked, now flooded the local hardware stores for deadbolts and alarms. The firearm sales spiked. The illusion of safety was shattered, and with no suspect, no leads, Carla's case turned cold. It would stay that way for nearly 2 years. But in 1980, an old name entered the picture, Don Weber, freshly elected as the state attorney. Weber wasn't just ambitious, he was determined. On his first week in office, he pulled Carla's case file and made a promise: the case will be solved. His reasons were personal. In a conversation with a local journalist named Patrick, Don admitted Carla reminded him of a girl that they had gone to school with. The image of her body, the brutality of the scene, had stuck with him since the first time he walked the crime scene with a detective. He couldn't let it go. Weber assembled a task force, one with fresh eyes and new energy. One of his team members happened to be attending a seminar led by none other than John Douglas, the pioneer of the FBI profiling. His groundbreaking work with serial killers like Ted Bundy, Ed Kemper would later inspire the hit Netflix series Mindhunters. Douglas agreed to lend his expertise to Carla's case. He started as he always did, with behavior analysis. He asked a simple but telling question. Was Carla the kind of woman that would fight back? The answer was a unanimous yes. She was strong-willed and feisty. Douglas nodded and began to build his profile. A white male aged between 25 and 30, either living at or visiting a home 1 to 2 houses away from Carla at the time of the murder, possibly with an electrical background, socially awkward, particularly with women. Likely left the area around 30 days after the crime. He would be driving a red or orange beat-up Volkswagen. Then came the most haunting prediction of all. If you publicize the case the right way, the killer will call. He'll offer to help, but only because he doesn't want to be seen as a suspect. While the task force was waiting for that call, they pressed forward. A fresh review of the crime scene photographs revealed something investigators previously overlooked: a bite mark on Carla's neck. The photo alone wasn't enough. They needed more. With the family's blessing, they exhumed the body. It was a bright, clear day, with the team gathered around the cemetery. A journalist who witnessed it said the moment was surreal. When the coffin was lifted from the ground and unsealed, it hissed, a sign that it had been airtight, that gave them hope. What they found inside changed everything. The original cause of death was listed as strangulation, but upon re-examination, the forensic pathologist gave a different conclusion. Carla had drowned. She had been held underwater until her lungs filled. It was personal, prolonged, and it changed the nature of the crime entirely. With this evidence in hand, bite marks, drowning, and John Douglas's profile pointing to someone close, they zeroed in on an old name, Dwayne Conway. Dwayne was brought in for another round of questioning. He showed clear signs of stress, but repeated his claim of innocence. Still, the pressure was mounting. And then, just as John Douglas predicted, the phone rang. It was John Pranty, the man who had been sitting on the porch with Dwayne that day. John said he wanted to talk. He wasn't a suspect. He insisted. He was a witness. He just didn't want to be accused of anything. But what would come next would cast a long shadow over everything Wood River thought it knew. Little did John Pranty know, the moment he picked up the phone to offer help, he unknowingly stepped right into the profile that John Douglas laid out weeks earlier. Almost word for word, John repeated just what Douglas predicted. I just want to assist. I'm not a suspect. I just don't want to be accused. But now he was a suspect. Investigators turned their focus onto John. The first thing they did was looked into his vehicle. What they discovered was chilling. At the time of Carla's murder, John Pranty had been driving a red beat-up square-back Volkswagen, exactly as described by the FBI profile. The odds were shrinking, the walls were closing in. Then came the examination of the bite marks. Carla's body had been exhumed, the evidence preserved. Forensic specialists were able to take precise measurements of the bite marks on her neck. Impressions were taken by both John Pranty and Dwayne Conway. The impressions were sent to a forensic odontologist in New York. The expert's conclusion was blunt. This is your guy. But the evidence didn't stop at the bite marks. Several witnesses came forward claiming they had heard John bragging about Carla's murder, describing the crime scene in disturbing detail, details never released to the public. He allegedly spoke about tying Carla's hands behind her back. He mentioned a 25-gallon bucket of water, and he talked about the basement. And his friends, they painted a troubling picture of a man who didn't handle rejection well, a man with a temper, especially when turned down by women. John Douglas's profile was becoming prophecy. Don Weber, now with enough thread to weave the full theory, laid it out for the press and the jury. John Pranty came to Carla's house that day, hoping to pursue sexual relations. Carla was consistent with her character. Carla would reject him firmly. An argument escalated in the driveway. Carla walked into her home, possibly retreating to the basement, thinking it was over. But John followed her inside, unnoticed, and that's where the attack occurred. Douglas added one more layer. Whenever water is presented in a crime scene, a full bathtub, a bucket, a sink, it is rarely accidental. and his experience had often meant staging. The killer was trying to make the scene look like something it wasn't, a misdirection. Then there was the final puzzle piece, the Navy knot. Douglas recognized it immediately. The way Carla's hands had been bound, with electrical cord tied using a knot exclusively in Navy training, led him to deduce that the killer had military experience, specifically the Navy. Combine that with the use of electrical cord, and you now have a suspect who is both a Navy veteran and has experience with electrical work. John Prantey fit both profiles. It was enough. The evidence had mounted too high to ignore. The case against John Prantey was tight. John Prantey was arrested and tried. He was found guilty of the murder of Carla Brown. He was sentenced to 75 years to life. Justice, years in the making, had finally come to Wood River. Sometimes the answer we seek are buried deep, in silence, in fear, in the places we least expect. Carla Brown's story reminds us that evil can wear a friendly face, that the truth, no matter how long it hides, will always leave a trail. But how many stories like hers remain untold? How many killers walk among us unnoticed, waiting? If this story moved you, if you believe every victim deserves a voice, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more true crime deep dives, and tap the bell so you never miss when the truth rises again. Because here, the shadows talk and we listen.